Let's look at how to take our flexible grid and convert it into a responsive grid. So here's an example of what we're going to create. You'll notice as I make it narrower here, the layout adapts and it changes. So on medium screens, you can see the image gets bigger and it takes up a whole row. And then we have 2 columns underneath. And then if it gets even smaller, you can see it switches all into a single column. And then of course the large one is 3 columns across. So we have this adaptive responsive grid now based on our flexible grid. So in my HTML, you can see that the setup is fairly similar to our flexible grid. It's just the class, I have the class of grid on the surrounding div and then the class of unit on the inner ones. If we just check out the CSS, you can see nothing really is that different from our flexible grid, except you'll notice that there is no width on the unit. And that's because it's changing depending on each different media query breakpoint that we set up. So let's look at our small screen. On the small screen here, I make my browser small, I want all of these 3 units to be stacked like this. So this is their default state anyways, but I'd like to specify in my HTML. So in here, I want to add a new class for each breakpoint in my website. So let's have a class here called unit S. So this is what I want this unit to do on small screens. So on small screens, I want it to span all the way across one row. If we start thinking fractionally again, a unit that spans one whole row is not a fraction. So in here, it would just be 1 because it's taking up a whole row. We'll look at more of the fractions later. So each of these then, I want them to be unit S1. So each one will take up one whole row on small screens. So there's our small screen class. Let's go into our CSS and style that. So that would be unit S1 will have a width of 100%. So if we go and refresh, it should obviously look exactly the same. Now let's take the next step here on medium screens. So somewhere around here, if we look at what I want it to look like, these 2 columns down here are side by side. So I want the image to still take up one row, but then I want these columns to each be split into 2. So let's add another class here, fractional class. So on the image, it would be unit M for medium 1 because it's taking up one whole row. And then these other ones down here would be unit M 1/2. So they're taking up half of the available space. Now, if we go back to our CSS, we can put a media query in here. So at media, only screen and min width of, let's say 30M. That will probably be approximately what we want. You'll probably need to adjust this 30M based on your layouts and your breakpoints that you are looking for and your content. So in here, we'll target unit M 1/2 and give it a width of 50%. So if we go refresh now, you'll see our columns are taking up 50% of the available space. And if I make my screen smaller, you'll notice they snap back to the stacked version. Now let's take it one step further to the larger screens right here. And that's where I wanted all of the columns to be spanning across one row. So unit L, thinking fractionally, that would mean that they're taking up 1/3 of the available space. So all of these will take up 1/3 of the available space. If I go back to my CSS then, let's do a media query here. Let's do 50M. Again, that may need to be adjusted based on your screen size. So in here then we'll do unit L 1/3. All right, width 33.333%. Now if we go and refresh, you can see we now have our 3 columns in beside each other. So on smaller screens, so on medium screens, we have this layout, this one spanning all the way across, and then the 2 underneath. And then on small screens, we have them stacked. So we have a responsive grid system now based on these separate units. And the great thing about this is by looking at our HTML right here, we can tell exactly what each of these things are doing on each screen. So on small screens, we know it's taking up one whole row, medium screens, one whole row, and then large screens, it's taking up a third of a row. So our approach to making responsive grids is extremely declarative. It's very obvious by looking at our HTML what exactly this element is doing at each different screen size. Now, if we were trying to create a complete grid solution, we're missing a lot of different sizes. It's quite possible that on small, we might want something like unit S 1/2. Maybe we'd want, unit S 1/3, etc. We may want all these different sizes. Medium, we might want like 5ths or 6ths, maybe 8ths on the large screen. And so coming up with all these different sizes is how we create a complete grid system. Online, there are lots of different responsive grid generators that we can use. I've created one for myself here that I've linked to for you guys that will create the code similar to what we've done in this video. All you need to do is add the different breakpoints that you want, and you'll notice it will add all the different classes and that you need to create the different layouts. You can choose the columns, so small we want 4, maybe we want 6 columns on medium and 8 on large. You can adjust your minimum widths and you can have all different breakpoints, and this will create a complete grid system for you that you can just copy this and paste it into your grid to use in your website.